Hey everybody, I just wanted to make a quick video today about trekking in Nepal because of an announcement that was made last week, and because this channel is familiar with and has a history with trekking in Nepal, I thought I'd give my 2 cents on it. Just to be clear, although there have been quite a few articles about this already, a lot of my thoughts are coming directly from a blog post by The Longest Way Home, which I will link in the description. So, March 9th, 2023, a decision was made by the Nepal Tourism Board that solo trekking in Nepal is banned. So, that's a pretty big decision. Nepal has long been known as a place where solo trekkers can go and just kind of do their own thing, and that's kind of one of the big appeals of Nepal as a trekking destination. But now that doesn't seem to be the case anymore. At least as of April 1st, 2023, NTB is requiring trekkers to have guides. So what do I think about this decision? Obviously, coming from a personal view, I'm not very happy with this decision. From an objective standpoint, I understand why this decision was made on paper. And that's going to be important because there are a few reasons why, even though I could understand this decision being made, information on what we have about how this decision is going to play out just doesn't seem to make a lot of sense, and it seems a little bit more cynical than as a good rule to try and keep people safe. The first red flag is that Nepal as a country, as a trekking country, actually does not have a ton of disappearances every year. It seems that the Nepal Tourism Board is drawing on a number of about 10 to 15 trekkers missing each year. Even that number, as low as that is, seems to be inflated. There are a number of different websites that you can go on to look up missing trekkers for all regions across the world, but also Nepal. And going to these websites, you'll find that the number is really between 5 and 7 per year. In 2022, in total, I think there were 6 missing trekkers. In 2021, there was no trekking. And in the beginning of 2022, there were 6 trekkers missing. Again, according to this website, these numbers might not be entirely accurate, but neither is Nepal's TIMS system for keeping track of trekkers, so it's hard to say exactly how many trekkers go missing each year, but if we assume that family members are searching for missing trekkers and doing a good faith effort to try and locate them, that they would be that their information would be located on these external sites to try and make the public aware of missing family members. So there we have a pretty low number of missing trekkers, especially when you compare it to other parts of the world. For example, Switzerland in 2022, I think, had around 122 people missing. So it's difficult to compare those two countries. It's sort of like apples and oranges. Switzerland probably has better trekking infrastructure than Nepal, and yet has more people missing. It's possible Nepal's trekking management system is not very good, so we have to then rely on other sources of information on how many trekkers went missing in a given year. That's sort of red flag number 1. And even if implementing these rules, or this rule about needing a guide, lowered the number, then, that's more people saved, and that's good. That's always a good thing. So maybe that's not such a big deal. But then red flag number 2, and this is the bigger one to me personally, is that this rule is only for foreigners. Now, foreigners are not the only people who trek in Nepal. Nepalis also trek in Nepal. And Nepalis also get lost. If we look at the number in 2020 for missing trekkers on this website, over half of them were Nepali. There were 6 people who disappeared in Nepal in 2020, and 4 of them were Nepali, all in one group. But this provision does not apply to Nepali people. So you start to raise your eyebrows a little bit as to this decision, because it makes you start to think, is this really out of concern for the safety of people, or is this more of a cash grab for foreigners coming to trek in Nepal? And here's the thing, I don't even mind, I understand why Nepal wants to take advantage of foreign visitors and their wallets. Nepal is a very poor country. Tourism is a big part of the Nepali market, so you would want to try and take advantage of that as much as you can. But the really cynical thing here is that this new rule does not apply to independent guides. It only applies, you have to be part of a licensed tour agency. And whether or not these touring agencies have some connection to people in NTB, it's a little bit too conspiratorial for me. But corruption is not unheard of in Nepal, so yeah, I don't really have an opinion on that. So make of that what you will, but those are some pretty big red flags to me. That's what's happening. That's how I kind of feel about it. So let's move on to the last part. What will become of trekking in Nepal? It seems to be the case, although all we have to go on right now until April 1st, 2023, or until more cases come through, is one letter from NTB, one very short letter from NTB outlining this new guideline. So until it's put into practice, I don't know if we're going to be able to know exactly how it's going to play out in Nepal. It could be the case that this law goes into effect, or this ban goes into effect, and nothing changes. A good example that Longest Way Home brought out in their article, and I actually remember when this happened because I was in Nepal when it did, is in 2017 in Kathmandu they outlawed horns on bikes and cars and trucks. You're technically not allowed to use your horn on your vehicle while in the Kathmandu Valley. Obviously that is not the case now. Everybody uses their horn and nobody listens to the law. So we could have a case like that. I think in reality what's going to happen is, because as of now the guidelines are so vague, what you're going to have happen is there are going to be a number of treks that you still don't need a guide for. So the best way to know whether or not you need a guide for a trek currently is whether or not you would currently need a TIMS card for it. So the TIMS card is Nepal's current trekker management system. You purchase one whenever you're about to go on a trek in an area that requires it, and there are checkpoints along the way where you have to check in with your card, and that is supposed to regulate when a trekker enters an area and when they leave and where they are, so that if search and rescue efforts are needed, they have a radius that they can start searching in. Those checkpoints have not been manned since 2020, since the beginning of the pandemic. They weren't manned in 2022 when we went to Nepal, and as far as I can tell now, they're still not manned. And these checkpoints are going to be the areas where you would check in with a guide. So unless those checkpoints are manned, or if a national park or an area does not have those checkpoints, then you shouldn't need a guide. So I think what's going to end up happening is that there's going to be an underground trekking world where there are going to be all these trails that trekkers find where you don't, or experienced trekkers find, where you don't need a guide to go and trek on them. Ironically enough, currently the Everest Base Camp Solukhumbu area, you don't need a TIMS card to enter there, which means you don't need a guide as of now to get to Everest Base Camp, which is kind of funny. Also really funny is that Makalu is also not a TIMS national park. You do not need a TIMS card to go to one of the most remote, one of the remotest parks in Nepal, which means you also don't need a guide. So I don't get how a lot of this lines up. It really doesn't seem to. I think this was a very shotgun decision, obviously with not a ton of guidelines thought out, and it just seems to be more and more cynical the more you look at it. So I think that's kind of the future we're looking at if it gets implemented come April 1st, and it might end up just being the funniest April Fool's joke ever. But as of now, it's hard to say. If you want more information, I suggest reading the full Longest Way Home article, which I will link in the description. And yeah, I guess we'll just have to wait and see what happens on April 1st. Anyway, if you have thoughts on this, feel free to comment them down below. Anyway, there are more videos to come, especially in April. I have a ton of stuff from Japan, but I wanted to give my thoughts on this since it seems relevant to the channel. Have a good one, and we'll see you in the next one.